Welcome to the Picky Girl Travels podcast. I'm Adelia Borashade. My guest this week has what used to be for the longest time my dream job. She's a diplomat in the U.S. Foreign Service. That sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? For the last 3 years, Yvette Gaither has worked around the world, helping strengthen the U.S.'s relationship with other countries. And as if that alone isn't impressive enough, she did all of this while raising her son by herself. I especially wanted to share her story with you as it kind of gives you a new outlook on the possibilities that exist for how to work and live abroad. You work for the U.S. State Department. Is that is living abroad as part of your work with them? Is that the first time that you lived outside the U.S.?
Yes, it is the first time. Once I got the job with the State Department, my job is solely overseas, abroad.
So how did that happen? How did you come to work for the State Department?
So I got a master's in information systems. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, and all of my friends, a lot of people that I knew worked for the federal government, and I was in the private sector. And I was like, I want to work for the federal government too. So once I got my master's, the first place I applied to was the FBI, because I always had a dream growing up of working for the FBI. I applied for the FBI, got the job, and once I saw the salary, I turned it down. I was very disappointed. So with that, I went towards the State Department. Now, this was, 14 years ago, so I do not want to discourage anyone from that. It's just that I was living in the DC area, and it is expensive to live in the DC area. So I just I was making more money in the private sector. So I turned down the job with the FBI. It's probably something more for starting entry level, if someone is younger in their career, things like that. So definitely, I don't want to sway people from applying for the FBI. So I went with the State Department. And with that, you have to take a test, and you have, an oral test. And from there, you have the background. So start to finish, it was like a year. You get your top secret clearance and everything like that. And from there, you get your selection of your first assignment, and you head overseas.
How competitive is that test? Because I believe I remember it being super competitive.
It is competitive, but being competitive does not mean that people will not be able to take the test. So everyone should, if they are interested in becoming a diplomat. And I always tell people there are many different ways of becoming a diplomat. So if the State Department is not for you, there are other avenues. But again, taking the test is not a problem. It's just you have to study for it, and you have to prepare for it and have a study partner.
Okay, so it's not impossible. Is your job as a diplomat as glamorous as we probably think it is?
No. I always tell people that they look at, Hollywood and TV, and I tell my friends it's no different than me working in the States, and I have a 9-to-5 job just like they do. It's just that it's not in Washington, D.C. or Atlanta. I go to work and come home just like everyone else. Everyone has different functions, but, it is still a 9-to-5 job.
Are you allowed to talk about the nature of the work that you do?
In a general term, bridging the gap with between the host country, wherever you are. Um, One of our big themes is Independence Day. Anywhere you go around the world, people are familiar with the 4th of July. So that is a good time to meet people and bring them in to your culture. And at the same time, they will invite you into the host country's culture. So anywhere from law enforcement to policies, making sure human rights is abided by. It's a gamut of things.
So what I hear is that, there are opportunities for people with a variety of skill sets and backgrounds if they wanted to get into that line of work.
I've met people who their former occupations, some were nurses. It's a variety. One of my good friends was a chemist. So I think there is something for everyone. They just might need to figure out the wording to see if it fits, what they're looking for. But definitely something. I know a librarian, and she works like in public affairs. So it's just, you should be able to find something that would suit your needs. The State Department also does outreach. Many times I've given lectures during Black History Month. And when I was in Algeria, I did a lecture to college kids, just bridging the gap, how they may be, most of them, the women, are oppressed. And then I would compare that being Black in the United States, with oppression. So things like that with outreach.
Now, I think probably because of the nature of your job, and it happens outside the United States, you've been able to live in, according to my notes, 5 different countries: Nigeria, Honduras, Dominican Republic, Thailand, Algeria. Did I miss any?
So the countries that I lived in was Chiang Mai, Thailand, Nigeria, Lagos, Nigeria, Algiers, Algeria, and Dominican Republic. Now, I have traveled for work to Honduras, Brazil, Haiti, lots of places, 4 or 5 countries in West Africa, East Africa, South Africa, Afghanistan. So I've been to 25 countries for work.
I'm sitting here just smiling like, that sounds pretty glamorous, but I know it's I know it's probably more complicated than I'm initially thinking. But as somebody who loves to travel, the thought of being able to visit other places and that be a part of my job is just very cool. I'm having a bit of a fangirl moment myself.
A great experience, which is why I also mentioned that there are many routes to becoming a diplomat. And just like with the State Department, where you have to take a test, there are, the FBI is there. We have many agencies within an embassy: Commerce, Social Security, FBI, Custom and Borders. All of these agencies are currently working in the embassy in Santo Domingo, where I am now. So that's why I wouldn't want people to focus just on the State Department, because there's many different avenues to get to become a diplomat. DEA, CIA, NSA, all of these agencies travel to around the world.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I don't think that's something a lot of people think about. I know I didn't outside of state, that, all of those agencies have some kind of presence there, and that would mean that they're going to be hiring for positions that allow people to live abroad. Of the countries that you lived in, I think I know your least favorite, but which one was your most favorite?
My most favorite was Lagos, Nigeria. And when I tell people that, they are quite surprised, because within the Foreign Service, regardless of what agency you are in, people do not flock to Nigeria. So, not sure why. It has a bad reputation, and that's just within the Foreign Service. But I had the best time, and I was there for 5 years. And my son graduated from high school there, and he considers it home as well.
Okay. Would you mind talking about what it was like being a parent and taking your child abroad with you?
So I think after a certain point, children are just used to moving. I made the decision to stay 5 years so that my son could have one high school experience. And I think that was beneficial for him and for me also, because now we have roots there. So coming from Thailand, going to Nigeria, if kids are young, they really do not have an issue with it. They can make friends anywhere. And all of the kids are in the same position, depending on what time they get to a particular post, is what we call it. So, some might come in the beginning of the school year, some might come in the middle. But what I've seen is they welcome all of the children of Foreign Service, because they're all in the same situation together. So with that, it wasn't hard to adapt. And he was relatively young. And also the kids at the international school, most of the time, are in a similar situation. So it might not be American kids. It could be kids that, their parents also work with companies like Shell, Exxon, where they have global jobs and they travel the world as well. So usually the kids after school are in the same situation.
Your son is Black, right? And
Yeah.
given, what life is like in the United States for young Black men, did that figure into your thinking at all?
At the time, I've been in 13 years, so it wasn't as widespread. I think the first time I became concerned was Trayvon Martin. And we were in Nigeria at the time, and my son was a teenager. And it was at that point that I became concerned. Not for being in Nigeria, but going back to these States, because my son is currently at a university in the States. So that's where my concern was. I never had concern traveling abroad. It's always been in the States. And usually I would send him home for the summers, things like that. But at the time when he graduated from high school, I was very concerned. And it took him a while to adapt. It took him about a year to adapt to the university.
I can imagine. Because when I moved to Honduras, my daughter was 15 when she came with me, and it ended up being a really, really good experience for her. It sounds like your son may be a third culture kid because of the amount of time that he spent abroad. My daughter was only out of the U.S. for a year, but it was a very positive experience for her. Do you think it was a positive experience for your son?
Definitely. And he still is close friends with all of, it was like 4 of them that were friends while we were there. They graduated together. and now they're graduating from the university, different universities, but they still talk every day. So it was a great experience for him to see, life outside of the United States, and also to realize when he did go back to Virginia, to see how sheltered and closed-minded people are, even at the age when he went back at 18.
I can only imagine the perspective that he had because of, the life that he lived abroad with you. What advice do you have for other single moms who are considering moving abroad and are concerned about, taking their child abroad with them?
Definitely take the opportunity. I don't think you become a global citizen that you will not regret it, and you will, gain friends all around the world, and they'll become lifelong friends. You'll definitely see a different perspective, especially if you do go back to the States to live. I haven't lived in the States since 2008. And even when I go back to visit for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, I still have culture shock, even if it's going to the grocery store or because I feel like things are so high. And just every day, and the hustle and bustle. So I feel like if you go overseas, you will not have the stress of everyday living in America. And I have friends who can attest to that it's just truly a rat race, and the hustle and bustle, just driving to work, every day. It's just the stress that people aren't aware of. And when I go back and I talk to my friends, I see it, where for me, going to work, I live 5 minutes from work, and it's easy living. So if you have the opportunity, definitely take it. You always have the States to come back to. It's always home. I look at it as always home. So I'm always glad to go to America despite everything that's happening, because it is home for me. But do not pass up the opportunity. We are looking for, Black diplomats. And that's why I stress that, because some people may be intimidated by the Foreign Service test, and there are many avenues to becoming a diplomat.
Well, I am glad that you mentioned that there is a desire to recruit more Black people into those positions, because I would imagine that there probably are some people who think that, okay, that might be something that would hold them back from pursuing one of those kinds of positions.
Definitely not, because they have all types of positions, and I'm sure it's something there for everyone, whether it's IT or a front office position with a secretary, or an analyst position, or, someone who likes to write, or even nurse practitioner, attorneys. Many attorneys give out visas. I do not work in the visa section, but many of the people that I know, they were prior attorneys, things like that, so it's something for everyone.
I understand now your previous comment about you really just have to think about how to frame the skill set that you have, and that there's probably a place that you can apply those. With Nigeria being sort of your favorite place that you've lived so far, I have to ask about this, because I know there are a lot of Black Americans who that is their dream, that if they were to leave the United States, they want to move to the continent. And you've lived in 2 different African countries. What are some of the realities of living in that part of the world? Because personally, I think a lot of people romanticize what that move would be like. And as somebody who lived in Nigeria for 5 years, you've traveled to different parts of Africa, I think you are uniquely qualified to speak to, like, okay, you're coming from America, this is what it's really like, or what you can expect.
So my reality is probably unrealistic if you are not moving with a company. You know, if they're not sponsoring you, then I cannot speak to that. I have friends who tell me that are Nigerians that my world is in a bubble because the State Department provides for everything. They provide for the housing, the utilities. The only thing that I was paying for was my internet bill and my cable bill if I got local cable, and food and things like that, but all housing and water supply, because of course the water is not drinkable. So all of that was provided for by the embassy, even putting gasoline in your car, because I've seen people actually wait in line for gas on a Friday, and they would pay people to sit there because they would not actually get to the gas pump until Sunday. So the reality is Nigeria, great country. It is third world. You do see poverty. You have the class system. The people that I dealt with were of the upper class, and that just came with the job. So again, I said I had a great time because lots of Americans travel to Nigeria, you know, black and white. So I was able to meet celebrities and go to concerts, and my church was a big church in Nigeria, and they had well-known gospel artists come. So it was like, as I call it, the New York City of West Africa. So my experience was great. I'm sure the white people liked it as well, because the people that I talked to, you know, they were sad to leave. So that's why I had a great experience. I enjoyed being with people that look like me. Again, you do have hardship. There is crime, just like it's anywhere. Definitely not the same type of crime that you probably would experience in the States, meaning with police and things like that, because they know that you are not Nigerian. They do have issues with police, but that is their local issues. I mean, that's just the day-to-day functions. Now, on the other end, living in Algeria, North Africa, as they are called, white Africans, was completely different. And I will never live in North Africa again.
Are you comfortable saying why you don't want to live there?
What I find, personal experience, Black people have it hard worldwide, just being the color of your skin. So with that, I experienced the racism of being Black, and also experiencing the racism of what people would, who are African Black, because no one initially thinks that I'm American. Wherever I go in the world, whether it's Brazil or wherever, they always feel like, oh, you're Brazilian. So except when I go to North African countries and they're fair skinned, white Africans, you see how they treat Black Africans. So whatever you see, like the clashes, if you read about it on the internet, it's true, because I experienced it. And I see the way that they treat Black women. And for me, had to press charges against someone for sexual harassment. And it was a local Algerian. It's just the way that they view Black women.
I've heard that quite a bit. So your experience lines up definitely with everything that I have heard. I've not visited that part of Africa yet. Now let's backtrack a little bit. to people having to wait in line for gas, to pay somebody to wait to hold their spot because they're going to be in line for a day
Or two.
or two.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, no, I asked you that question because, like I said, I think that there are some people who romanticize living on the continent because they really want the experience, like you said, of living in a place where everybody looks like them. But I think they forget that it's not necessarily going to run like the US does. And so there are those things like having to wait in line 2 days to buy gas, uh, electricity,
It's very
shortages, that kind of thing.
to live. It's very expensive to live in Nigeria, and I will speak about Nigeria because that's where I live. Electricity, for example, my colleagues who worked with me, because we also have local staff, which are the Nigerians who will work in the embassy, and they're your counterparts, and they also bridge the gap with diplomacy. So there were times when, you will have colleagues who will say they haven't had electricity. Now they may have a generator, but again, you have to, once again, wait in line. This is when it's extreme. Sometimes they have fuel shortages, things like that. But people have told me where it's been months where they have not had local electricity.
That kind of thing. When I lived in Honduras, we would lose electricity quite often, like that's just what would happen, and you just kind of roll with it. But I think if you go with this mindset about like how it's supposed to be like it is back in the US, you're going to set yourself up for a little disappointment.
Right. And I think that's the biggest thing, because not having electricity for a month or two, that's a long time, especially to buy fuel or something like that. And again, with the embassy, I was unaffected because we have a 24/7 generator. And again, that's paid for by the embassy. You also have air conditioner and things like that what people take for granted.
I can't imagine with living there without air conditioning. That would be really, really tough.
The first time I went on an assignment, I was living in Thailand, and it was my first time going to Africa, and I went to Niamey, Niger. And not sure if you're familiar with that. At the time, it was the poorest country in Africa. So this was 2008. I stayed in a cement hut. It did have air conditioning, but they did not have a generator. So that was my first experience of the guy working at the hotel. Well, I was in a hut, so we call them hotels. But that was when I was like, "What? Why did the ceiling fan?" I was in the restaurant. They had really good fish. Why did the ceiling fan go off? And he was like, "The power went out." And I was like, "Well, where's the generator?" And they didn't have one. I was like, "Oh, wow." Okay. And at that point, I realized going forward, you always have to pick a hotel that has a generator.
If somebody wants to pursue a route similar to the one that you took, what do they need to know?
That there are really no limits, because I know people who have a bachelor's only, and they work in the embassy. I know people who may not even have a bachelor's. And now with that, it might be a job like a secretary, and there's nothing wrong with that. But my point is that there are jobs out there, so that's not to discourage anyone. So, look for what you're interested in and apply. Because for me, I have 2 masters. You don't have to have 2 masters. It's just, I got in with one master's, and then they told me that they would pay for me to get a second one, so I got an MBA. Okay, that was just my personal thing. But I do know if you have a master's that you can command more money. So I do tell people that if they're looking one way or the other and you want to come in starting making good money, then having a master's will do that for you in the government. That's what I know. If you decide not to, that's fine as well. But what has been told to me for the past couple of years is that they're looking for diversity. It really, I know friends who have degrees in all different types, you know.
If somebody were to go for a position that did not necessarily require a degree, would they still get a package that included housing and those kinds of perks?
So for the people who apply that do not have a degree, they do get the same compensation, meaning the housing and everything like that. Of course, the salary is lower and you do not take the test.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There are many diplomats that work in an embassy who came in not taking a test. And for example, they have positions in facility management where they manage the housing that we live in and they manage the embassy building, and or HR in human resources. They do not take the test. So you have human resource officers. So there are many positions that does not require a test, and you are still coming in as a diplomat.
Well, I think that is very useful information because based on a lot of the questions I see, I think people there is a segment of the population that wants to move abroad and doesn't have a degree, but I think a lot of the messages that they're getting is that like, oh, you don't have a degree, you don't have a chance. And
Right.
so I'm happy to hear that that's not necessarily the case.
This is why I try not to focus on the test, because I know so many people who have not taken the test and are my neighbors, you know? So that's why I don't want to discourage people, because people might not want to go that route. And I'm saying you don't have to.
Okay. Well, no, that's great. If somebody is, if somebody's going to be successful working in the line of work that you do, what would you say is like the top 2 or 3 traits that they would need to have in order to be successful?
So definitely have to be outgoing, because you just come in contact with so many different people.
About, how you lived abroad. Now, you work for the U.S. State Department. Is living abroad as part of your work with them, is that the first time that you lived outside the U.S.?
Yes, it is the first time. Once I got the job with the State Department, my job is solely overseas, abroad.
Okay. So how did you come to work for the State Department?
So I got a master's in information systems. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, and all of my friends, a lot of people that I knew worked for the federal government, and I was in the private sector. And I was like, I want to. So once I got my master's, I too was the FBI, because I always had a dream growing up of working for the FBI. I applied for the FBI, got the job, and once I saw the salary, I turned it down. I was very disappointed. So with that, I went towards the State Department. Now, this was, 14 years ago. So I just I was making more money in the private sector. So I turned down the job with the FBI. It's probably something more for starting entry level, if someone is younger in their career, things like that. I don't want to sway people from applying for the FBI. So I went with the State Department. And with that, you have to, take a test, and you have, an oral test. And from there, you have the background. So start to finish, it was like a year. You get your top secret clearance and everything like that. And from there, you get your selection of your first assignment and you head overseas.
How competitive is that test? Because I believe I remember it being super competitive.
It is competitive, but being competitive will not be able to take the test. So everyone should, if they are interested in becoming a diplomat. And I always tell people there are many different ways of becoming a diplomat. So if the State Department is not for you, there are other avenues. But again, taking the test is not a problem. It's just you have to study for it, and you have to prepare for it and have a study partner.
Okay, so it's not impossible. What kind of content are they asking about?
So with that, I would rather not focus as much on that.
Okay, not a problem. I was just thinking that people might be like, okay, is it a math test? Is it a history test? That sort of thing. But no worries, no worries. Okay, so is is your job as a diplomat as glamorous as we probably think it is?
No. I always tell people that they look at Hollywood and TV, and I tell my friends it's no different than me working in the States, and I have a 9-to-5 job just like they do. It's just that it's not in Washington. With that, everyone has different functions, but
Okay, all right. Are the nature of the work that you do?
So with it just bridging the gap with between the host country, wherever you are. One of our big themes is Independence Day. Anywhere you go around the world, people are familiar with the 4th of July. So that is a good time to meet people and bring them in to your culture. And at the same time, they will invite you into the host country's culture. So anywhere from law enforcement to just policies.
So there are opportunities for people with a variety of skill sets and backgrounds if they wanted to get into that line of work.
People who their former occupations, it's a variety. Was a chemist, so I think there is something they just might need to figure out the wording to see if it fits. What they're looking for, but definitely something. I know a librarian, and it's just, you should be able to find something. The State Department also does outreach. Many times I've given lectures during Black History Month. And when I was in Algeria, I did a lecture to college kids, just bridging the gap, how they may be, the women are oppressed. And then I would compare the United States, with oppression. So things like that with outreach.
Now, I think probably because of the nature of your job and it happens outside the United States, you've been able to live in, according to my notes, 5 different countries: Nigeria, Honduras, Dominican Republic, Thailand, Algeria. Did I miss any?
So the countries that I lived in was Chiang Mai, Thailand, Nigeria, Lagos, Nigeria, Algiers, Algeria, and Dominican Republic. Now, I have traveled for work to Honduras, Brazil, Haiti, lots of places, 4 or 5 countries in West Africa, East Africa, South Africa, Afghanistan. So I've been to like 25 countries for work.
I'm sitting here just smiling like, that sounds pretty glamorous, but I know it's I know it's probably more complicated than I'm initially thinking. But as somebody who loves to travel, the thought of being able to visit other places and that be a part of my job is just very cool. I'm having a bit of a fangirl moment myself.
It's a great experience, which is why I also mentioned that there are many routes to becoming a diplomat. And just like with the State Department, where you have to take a test, there are, the FBI, many agencies within an embassy: Commerce, Social Security, FBI, Custom and Borders. All of these agencies are currently working in the embassy in Santo Domingo, where I am now. So that's why I wouldn't want.
Hey, I just want to take a moment to thank you all for your support. Over the last few weeks, my life has kind of been a whirlwind of craziness and stress. For those of you who are wondering, I did finally get out of China. I was able to make it back to my adopted home, Mexico, specifically Mexico City. I've been here for about a week. Most of my time has been spent trying to find an apartment because living out of a suitcase for the last month has really taken its toll on me. So I just want a place to call my own. I want to ask everybody's forgiveness for not being able to get an episode out last week. Eventually, I'll find space to fill y'all in on all the craziness that went down when I tried to get out of China. But thank y'all for sticking with me. Thank you for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes for more resources on landing jobs like Yvette's, with the U.S. government, either as a diplomat or as a contractor. For everybody who has left reviews on iTunes and Spotify's, I just want y'all to know that I have been blown away by your kind words. I appreciate every single review you've left. If you haven't left a review or you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please consider doing that. Doing both of those things makes the podcast more prominent and helps other women find the show and hopefully benefit from it. If you are interested in supporting the podcast in a small financial way, you can use the link in the description to become a patron. I haven't mentioned this in a while, but I do have an IG. That's Picky Girl Travels. I'm on Facebook at Picky Girl Travels. I am also on Twitter. And of course, there is the blog, which I will be adding new content about my adventures in Mexico, pickygirltravelstheworld.com. See y'all soon. Next episode will be up on Friday.